Okay, thank you everyone for coming. Let's begin. We are up to Shemuel Bet, chapter 13, Perek Yud Gimel. Today's chapter is going to pick up on the stories of David's children. So we mentioned, we read the end of Yud Bet. Yes, I do remember we read the end of Yud Bet with Yoav and the positive ending to his story. Chapters 13 and beyond now are going to talk about David's children and some of the challenges that arise within the house of David in accordance with the punishment that Hashem had bestowed upon David for his involvement in the story of Bathsheba. We saw that one of his punishments was that sword would be in his family amongst his children. There's going to be strife, there's going to be rebellion, there's going to be murder, there's going to be a lot of difficult things that are going to happen. And we'll see how these stories intertwine and relate to David's own actions in the story of Bathsheba. Perek Yud Gimel is a very painful chapter about strife that goes on within David's family. Once again, we'll find improper sexual behavior, and we'll also find murder as well, as we found in the last two chapters. So let's begin, and we'll see what takes place. Chapter 13 begins, if you have the Hebrew English in the Sacks, it's page 743 on the bottom. Chapter 13, verse 1. And it was after this took place, to Absalom, son of David, he had a sister who was very beautiful by the name of Tamar. Amnon ben David. And Amnon, a different son of David, takes a liking to her. Right? So it's important to understand the family dynamic over here. Avshalom is one of David's sons. Amnon is also one of David's sons. And they have a sister, Tamar. Now we know that David had many wives. So Avshalom and Amnon are half-brothers. They share a same biological father, David, namely, but they come from different mothers. Tamar's relationship with the two of them is a bit gray. It's not clear. It says that they have a sister, that Amnon and Tamar are brother and sister. Avshalom and Tamar are brother and sister. But as we shall soon see, it is impossible for us to explain that that Avshalom and Tamar are biological siblings. Because if that were the case, that would mean that Amnon and Tamar share a biological parent. And we'll see that that is impossible as the story will unfold. So it has to be that Tamar is called a sister, but is not actually sharing any biological parents with Amnon, who's going to be the one to engage with her, right?
I think the proof of that is just the way they start the sentence. Avshalom's son of.
Very good, very good. Rabbi Amnon Bazar brings that up, that in both of them, Avshalom is mentioned ben David, Amnon is also mentioned ben David. Tamar is mentioned as a sister of Absalom, but we'll see that that won't be possible. You confused for a second, Lisa? Yeah, it is confusing. Whose daughter? She's not. No, she's not. She's not. What we're going to say, you're going to see in a moment. It's impossible that Amnon and Tamar share
not even a father. I thought they were
correct. They share nothing with each other. They're completely estranged from each other. Avshalom and Amnon are half brothers. Avshalom and Tamar are brother and sister from a biological mother. But Tamar's parents are totally far into the story. So if you exactly, in other words, Tamar and Avshalom share a mother, and Avshalom and Amnon share a father. So Avshalom is the connecting piece between the two of them, but Amnon and Tamar are not biologically related to each other at all. And you'll see in a moment why that has to be. The rabbis go through a lot of difficulty trying to figure out how this relationship works. They have other explanations. This is the explanation I gave to you, is the Tosafot's explanation in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, and I think it's the simplest one, so it's the one that we're going to go with. Okay? Yes, I believe that they are, or they are now, right? So they're both considered sons of David. I don't remember if they're both mentioned back then. I think it was in chapter 7 or something like that. I don't remember exactly. Definitely Avshalom is mentioned. I forget if Amnon is mentioned. I forget. So what happens here? Let's go to verse 2. Vayetzer le'Amnon hithalot ba'avur Tamar achoto. Amnon became very distraught because of his sister Tamar. And again, that language we're going to say is not so precise. It's calling her a sister, but they're really not biologically related. They're only related through Avshalom. Ki betulahi, because she was a virgin. Vayipale be'einei Amnon la'asot la me'uma. And it seemed impossible for Amnon to do anything with her. In other words, Amnon is lovesick for Tamar. He has a tremendous desire to be with her, but he realizes because of the family dynamic, it seems very unlikely, very impossible for him to ever be able to act on such an impulse. Verse 3. Ule Amnon rea ushmo Yonadav. Amnon has a friend, and his friend's name is Yonadav, ben Shim'a achi David, who is the son of Shim'a, the brother of David, so they're cousins. Ve'Yonadav ish hacham me'od. And Yonadav is a very smart person. He understands how to do things. Yes? Vayomer lo, madua ata kacha dal ben hamelech. Why are you so dejected, my prince, son of the king? Baboker, morning after morning, I see you. You don't look good. Halo tagidi, tell me what's going on. Vayomer lo Amnon. Amnon says, Et Tamar achot Avshalom ahi ani ohev. Tamar, the sister of Avshalom, notice that he doesn't call her his sister. He says, Ahot Avshalom, Ahi, my brother, Ani Ohev. I have a tremendous desire for her. I love her. Verse 5, Vayomer lo Yehonadav, Shechav al mishkabecha ve'hithal. So Yehonadav is going to give him a plot on how he can get Tamar with him in a room alone to potentially try and finagle an opportunity with her. He says, I'll tell you what you do. Lie down on your bed, vehitchal, and pretend to be sick. Uba avicha lir'otecha, your father will come to see you. Ve'amarta elav, and say to your father David, Tavona Tamar achoti v'tavreni lechem. Bring Tamar, my sister, before me, and let her give me food to eat. Take care of me. Ve'asta le'ainai et habirya. Let her prepare food in front of me. Leman asher er'eh, so that I could see ve'achalti miyada, and I can eat from her hand. I want to know that she's preparing it, and she's a good cook, good chef. Let her come, let her prepare me food, and I'll eat from her hand, and this way she'll take care of me. Amnon likes the plan. Vayishkav Amnon vayitchal. Amnon lies down and he feigns illness. Vayavo hamelech lir'oto. The king David comes to see him. Vayomer Amnon el hamelech. Then Amnon says to the king, Tavona Tamar achoti utlabev le'ainai shetel lebivot. Let my sister Tamar come and prepare me a couple of cakes in front of me, and let her bring them to me, and I'll be able to eat from them. Now already something very interesting just happened. What do you say? So you see again achoti. Why do you think he says achoti if he's not really his sister? Excellent, very good, right? Amnon is trying to set up the situation where it doesn't look like he's trying to do anything. He informs David about it. He seems to be saying, oh, it's my sister. So it feels like it's an innocent relationship. Nothing's really going to happen. He's trying to create the atmosphere of lack of suspicion for whatever is going on over here. Notice, however, that Amnon, in his words, is almost hinting already to what he's going to do. He changed a little bit from Yonadav's words. Yonadav said, tell them that v'tavreni lechem, you'll give me bread. He changed it to utlabev le'enai shtel lebivot. What do you hear in those words? Lev. Lev means what? Like heart, love. He's kind of in the course of the process, almost inadvertently giving up what's really in his heart of hearts. This idea that he wants to kind of be close to her, right? That he's interested in her. Vayishlach David el Tamar habayta lemor. So David sends to Tamar at the home and says, Lechina bet Amnon achicha. So David doesn't think anything of this. He says, go to Tamar. Tamar, why don't you go and take care of your brother Amnon? Ve'asi lo habirya, and prepare food for him. Vatelech Tamar bet Amnon achiha. Tamar does in fact go to Amnon, her brother. Ve'hu shochev, and he's lying down. Vatikach et habatzek, she takes the dough, vatalosh utlabev le'enav, and she kneads and she makes the cakes, vatibashel et halevivot. Now, pause the story right here. She's cooking, she's making the food. The two of them are alone in a room together. So his plan worked. Now, what was the plan at this point? What did we think would happen at this juncture in the story? What was in the mind of Yonadav when he gave this plan to Amnon? What was in Amnon's mind? What should happen now? What was Amnon's plan? What do you think? Huh? Okay, but good. Okay, very good. So I think that what we have to say here is Nadav, who gave him the plan, remember he was called an Ish Hacham, a very wise person. Cunning. Okay, so interesting they say Hacham cunning, right? So that already gives you, which is true, by the way. He was pretty cunning, but what was he trying to do? If he was cunning, even let's say he was cunning, he's got to realize that if the plan was to get her in a room alone so that he could force his way on her, you got to know that there's going to be repercussions for that later on. So if Yonadav is such a cunning person and sees ahead of the game, it's hard to imagine that he was giving Amnon a way to go about forcing himself on his sister, even if it wasn't his sister, right? What it was more likely to be was that Yonadav was trying to create a situation in which Amnon could, somebody said, woo her, but if Amnon could try and convince her or seduce her, try to get a consensual relationship out of her, which he didn't feel he could do in any other type of way. That's probably what Yonadav had in mind all along, and it's probably what Amnon was prepared to do all along, except that what happened? His desire got the better of him, right? When he got himself in that room alone with Tamar, who he has a tremendous desire for, and he skips a step. He doesn't even take the opportunity to go about trying to seduce her. He goes straight to the idea of he wants to force his way onto her. And that's what happens. Verse 9. She took the pan and set out the cakes, but Amnon refuses to eat. Amnon says, take everybody out of the room. And everybody leaves the room. Now already, if you're somebody who's sitting in the room and you're watching this going on, you're already a little bit skeptical, right? This is a little suspicious. Why would everybody need to leave the room between Amnon and Tamar? Like, what's going to happen over here? So already Amnon is, what do they say? Yeah, laying the seeds, but he's also revealing his cards. He's giving up his position, what's going to happen over here. But what are they going to do? He's the prince. Everybody listens to the prince. So they leave. He wants them to leave. They leave. Vayomer Amnon el Tamar. Amnon says to Tamar, Havi'i habiriyah ha'heder. Bring the food inside and feed me. Ve'evrei miyadech, and I'll eat from your hand. Vatikach Tamar et halevivot asher asata. She takes the cakes that she made. Vataver le'Amnon achiha ha'hadra, and she brings them to Amnon, her brother, in the room. Notice again, her brother over here. She's not suspicious of the situation. She thinks she's gonna. It's what is it? It's innocent. No big deal. Vatigash elav le'echol. He comes close. He draws near to eat from the food. Vayachazek ba, and he grabs onto her. Vayomer la, and he says to her, Boi shichvi imi achoti. Come and lie with me, my sister. She says to him, Al ahi, please no, my brother. Al te'aneni, do not force upon me. Ki lo ya'aseh ken b'Yisrael. Such things are not done amongst the Jewish people. Al ta'aseh et ha'nevala hazot. Do not do such an abominable act, such a vile thing. Verse 13, Va'ani ana olichet herpati. Where will I carry my shame? The fact that I have been coerced. What am I going to do after this? And you're going to be like one of the scoundrels of Israel. You know what you should do? Please speak to the king. The king will not prevent you from being with me. In other words, what is she saying? There's a right way to do this. If you really love me that much, if you really want it to be the case, so then talk to the king, go about the right channels, and we can be married together and everything will be fine, right? This is the proof. This is the pasuk that is clear that they have to be able to be married together. It's this pasuk that tells us that they're not mamash brother and sister, because if they were really biologically related to each other, then this doesn't make any sense. How could she say that the King David would potentially recommend or allow such a relationship to exist in his own palace? So the Abarbanel, who we read about last week, he tries to say that no, maybe they are in fact related, and this was just one of her pleas. Like she was just trying to push him away. Oh, talk to the king, he'll let us get married together, something like that, even though she full well knows that that's not something that's a possibility. So the Abarbanel wants to keep alive the idea, because of the simple reading of the Pesukim, that they are in fact mamash related, but that she's just using some kind of a push-off tactic against him to get him to not do this terrible thing right on the spot. But Rabbi Amnon Bazak doesn't buy that so much. He says it's a very difficult perush that she would even suggest such a terrible thing about her father David if they were in fact related to each other, that he would do such a thing. So that seems a little bit far-fetched. There's one other approach, and I'll just mention it briefly, that suggests that Tamar was born from a Gentile woman whom David conceived with. Now you're going to tell me, how in the world could David conceive with a Gentile woman? So there's a law in the Torah that says that when people go out to war, if you see a beautiful woman, an Eshet Yefat To'ar, this is a section in Parashat Kitetse in the Torah. You want to see it inside? You want to take a look at it? This is, maybe?
We trust
You trust me? So the story goes that if the Jewish people go out to war and the soldiers see a beautiful woman from the enemy, they're allowed to take her. They bring her to their home. They leave her for 30 days. She doesn't, right, exactly. She doesn't do her hair. She doesn't do her makeup. She doesn't do her nails. She cries. She wears mourner's clothes and so on and so forth. And after the 30 days, the soldier still wants to be with her. He's allowed to go ahead and marry her and take her. Now, most halachic authorities rule that initially, even before that whole 30-day process takes hold, the soldier is allowed to engage one time with the woman, to have intercourse one time. And so some rabbis want to explain, the rabbis explain that David had such a relationship with a woman. Her name was Ma'acha. She was taken from the enemy. David slept with her, conceived a child, that was Tamar, while she was not Jewish. And therefore, Tamar was born from a non-Jewish. And then she converted. So as a result, she technically doesn't have any biological restrictions, and hence she's technically Amnon's sister, but not really, according to halakha. This is how the rabbis try to finish it. David is still her, but once a child is born, he has no paternity. The child who converts to Judaism, it's like he has no parents. Technically, biologically, yes, but halachically, no. Halachically, no. That's the approach that the rabbis want to take. That's also a difficult approach because people are, dumbfounded. Abar Banel says, how could it be that David, the king, would do such a thing, right? Because usually that law is like given for the average person, not for someone of David's caliber. And the text doesn't mention any of that whatsoever here. They find that to be pretty far-fetched as well. So that's why I said I think I like our original explanation that Tamar and Avshalom share a mother. They don't share a biological father. And Amnon and Tamar don't share any biological parents. That's proven from here. Back to our point, before we continue reading, essentially Tamar makes 4 points, 4 arguments why Amnon should not do this act. What are her 4 arguments? Let's pick them out. What does she say? This is an abominable act amongst the Jewish people. She appeals to his sense of morality. This is not something that gets done. Problem number 1. So don't do it. What? Her shame, right? Her embarrassment. Think about me. If you care about me, how am I going to move on from this situation after it takes place? Number 3, think about your reputation after this happens, right? If none of that bothers you, think about your reputation when word gets out of what exactly it is that you did. And number 4 is there may be a channel in which we could do this appropriately. So why not work on that? So Tamar is very lucid in the moment. She appeals to his morality. If that doesn't work, she appeals to the reputation, me and you, and maybe potentially just logic about what's going on. All of that tells us that when a person has a really intense desire for something, he or she can find a way to block out all of the rational arguments and all of the things that make a lot of sense and just completely follow the nature of their desire. That's just the way ta'ava sort of works. And so despite making several very, very strong and powerful arguments, all of which are going to come true in the end of the day, and it will cause Amnon to actually be killed, will bring to his death, he doesn't listen. Verse 14, Velo ava lishmoa bekola. He does not even open his ears. He has no opening to even hear what she's saying. He continues to hold on to her, to grab her, and he oppresses her, and he lies with her by force. And he commits this terrible, heinous act. Very, very difficult situation to read about and very unfortunate circumstances. What's fascinating is what happens in the aftermath of it, even more than the actual lead up to it. Verse 15, yeah, go ahead.
So that doesn't he have the option of marrying her?
Not only does he have the option, we would argue that he has the obligation.
It's her option. Yeah, it's her.
Correct. And this is an option that Tamar will try to exercise, right? Believe it or not. She's going to exercise this option, as we will see in the few psukim, and perhaps even more egregious than the act of actually coercing her is the way Amnon treats her in the aftermath of it. Watch. Verse 15, Vayisna'eha Amnon sin'a gedola me'od. Amnon, all of a sudden, after the deed is done, is overcome with an intense loathing and hatred for Tamar. Ki gedola hasin'a asher sene'a. Indeed, his loathing for her was greater than me'ahava asher aheva. The hatred that he had for her after it was over superseded the desire and the love that he had for her before he did it. That's how intense his feelings go from one end of the spectrum to the other end. Vayom ela Amnon, kumi lechi. Amnon says to her, get out. Now Tamar is going to try to at least salvage whatever amount of dignity and respect she's holding on to. And she now says to him, almost pleads with him, Al odot hara'ah hagidolah hazot. Please don't do this again. By the way, if you're looking at a milat mancha, a recurring word, anybody see a recurring word that's been happening a lot, at least out of Tamar's mouth? Al. Very good, sir, right? Al, please don't do this, right? Beforehand, she was saying, right? Beforehand, look back at Pasuk Yud Bet, look back at Pasuk 12. Vatomelo, al ahi, please don't, my brother. Al te'aneni, please don't make me suffer, don't oppress me. Al ta'aseh et ha'nevalah hazot, please don't do this abominable act. Now again, after the fact, she tells him again, Al, please don't, odot hara'ah hagdolah hazot, please don't commit and compound the situation to be even worse, to be even a greater evil. Worse than the thing that you did to me before, to now send me and cast me away. And once again, Amnon is just completely on his own program. He doesn't even open up. The words lo ava is a very, very powerful terminology in the Tanakh. It suggests that he had he didn't hear anything. He just totally blocked it out. It wasn't as if he thought and considered and went with it logically and played the side. No. He just completely tuned and blocks Tamar out. Verse 17 gets worse. After telling her to get out of her own accord, and she's obviously trying to plead with him, he says, I guess you're not getting the picture. We have to throw you out. He calls his young lad, his server, and he says, cast this one out into the outside, and lock the door behind her. Very powerful language. Zot, this one. Yeah, totally, right? Yeah, I even pick up. It's Zot, this one, right? Very demeaning, very condescending language, right? Like she's an animal of sorts. Verse 18. Ve'aleha ketonet pasim. She was wearing an ornamented tunic. Because this is what the children of the king typically wear, right? Especially when they're not married, when they're betulot. The server carries out Amnon's request, his command, and sends her out. And he locks the door behind her. Now Amnon is stuck. Tamar is stuck. Verse 19. Vatikach Tamar. Huh? A good question. What do you think? Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the allusions to Yosef over here in just a moment. So, hold that thought. Verse 19. Vatikach. I think the pshat reason why it is because she's going to remove the ketonet pasim to signal to everybody that she's no longer what everybody thinks that she is. The pasuk says that the single girls who have never been with a man before wear this type of cloak. And so now she's going to remove it from herself to be a symbol for everybody as to what happened. So Amnon's actions are not going to be concealed. They will very much be revealed. And the truth is, Amnon knew that. What did he think was going to happen when he sent her out? Had he decided to take her in, maybe they could have kept it between the two of them. They could have ended up organizing a marriage. He could have kept what he did under wraps, right? He doesn't care. He sends her out. What do you think is going to happen? Everyone's going to find out. Doesn't matter. Verse 19. Vatikach Tamar efer al rosha. Tamar takes ashes and places them on her head as a sign of mourning, avelut, for her current status. Uchtonet hapasim asher aleha kara. And the tunic, the ornamented tunic that she was wearing, she tore it. She rent the garments. Vatasem yadah al rosha. She places her hands on her head. Vatelech haloch v'za'aka. And she walks away screaming loudly in pain and in suffering. So you really, as the reader, are feeling tremendously sympathetic for what happens to Tamar. Tamar is clearly an innocent victim. Amnon is a heinous, grotesque individual for what he did and the way he treated her, not only before, but also afterwards, right? Now, the question is, what's going to be everybody's reaction to this? Pause here in the story. What should happen now? What would you expect should be the next events that should take place? People are going to want to know who, but let's leave people for a minute. Who should come into the story now? Liz can't give it what? Nadav probably has to come back in. He was the one who gave the advice a little bit. So he's David. The question is, how's David going to react to the situation? There's two people we're going to have to look at. A, David. In the end of the day, this is happening in David's palace. These are David's children. These are the ones who David has to take care of. We have to see what David's reaction is going to be. And who else? And Avshalom. Avshalom is her brother, right? And certainly we know the passion that siblings have. If somebody wrongs one of the other siblings, you could bet that a sibling is going to come and to defend the other sibling, right? Is this what I was just you beat me to it, right? Very good, right? So very good. No. You can shout it out. Shout it out. This is what it is. This is what we do, right? I mean, this has been our derech that when we read a story, we try to say, well, wait a minute, where have I heard this story before? So we've already connected the dots potentially to two different stories. One is the story of Dinah. That's going to be a big one. We'll have to sort of put the pieces together because that's another story of a rape and what the brothers do and so on. I want to try to get to the end of the story so we can maybe connect all of the dots. And we also mentioned the story of Yosef, which also plays a role in Yosef having resisted the temptation of being with a woman who wanted to coerce him, rips his garments, he runs outside. So you're seeing all of these little allusions to two stories. We're going to try to connect the dots and see what we can learn from this situation. Yes.
Right on the heels of the wheat story. Wasn't anything even in the middle.
Good.
Like get you out of the head.
Yes.
Like,
So this is coming right from David's story. It's exactly the same events, right? We have sexual impropriety. We're going to have murder. And maybe that'll help us to explain David's reaction for a moment.
yeah.
Okay?
And also
If you're David, how would you react in this situation? Let's play the David game. Put on your David hat. How would you react to the situation? How would you react? You'd be really upset. You try to intervene, horrified. What might you do? Punish him, consequence, right? But now think to
He's a
yourself,
little sensitive right now to the subject.
correct. In other words, what can Amnon
It's
say back to
hypocrisy.
David? Yeah, if David comes in and says to Amnon, this is a terrible thing that you did. How could you act in such a way? How could you take this woman? How could you treat her this way? What's Amnon going to answer? Well, gee, Dad, guess I learned it from the best, right? I hate to say it that way. That makes you shudder a little bit. But David, no, maybe. Definitely midah keneged midah, and we know that that's been the punishment. That's the way the punishment works. But David is almost maybe in the back of his mind knowing that he can't say anything because he's already involved in his own mess in a similar type of way. What's Amnon going to say to him? Who are you to tell me anything, right? You have your own skeletons in the closet that you have to deal with. You're certainly no better than me. Yeah.
It says Acharei had already could be way later because Shemuel was born. That could be like at least another 9 months, and then the 9 months first baby, and then the death of the first baby. So you're not talking about like 5 minutes later.
No.
Yeah.
No.
And you also.
But does that really matter necessarily? Because David to Bathsheba. Very good. So that is a very important point. Now that you mentioned it, I'll take a pause just to illustrate that. There is a comparison between David and Amnon. Even though you have, yes, the similar issues, the reactions of Amnon towards Tamar versus David towards Bathsheba are night and day. And that again highlights a little bit, again, we noted that the story is very damaging to David, But we did notice one ray of conduct that was beneficial to David, was appropriate for David, was that he does not shy away from what he does with Bathsheba. In fact, he marries Bathsheba and has to live with that, and has to cope with that, but he's not going to shirk his social responsibilities towards Bathsheba in the face of his own sin. He takes accountability for his things. And that's always been our major characteristic of David, is his willingness to accept accountability. Contrast that with Amnon here, who not only refuses to accept accountability, but basically sends her off and doesn't do even what's required by him according to the Torah, which is to at least take care of the one whom he coerced. It's amazing to see that Tamar, remember we talked about it in the last couple of classes, like what woman would want to be. Tamar is electing to say that. She's saying, please don't send me out. I need to stay here. You're a horrible person, but I need someone to take care. I can't go out and face that shame. And Amnon won't even give that to her.
Also, I think another differentiation is, yes, we talked about how Bathsheba was using the word coerce. I think the coerce is very different in both, because she was called, she came. So yes, maybe she couldn't say no because he was king, but she knew what was going on. She knew what she was. I'm not blaming her. I'm not saying she wanted, but she came in. It wasn't a violent act with
Correct.
begging and force.
Definitely not.
And, I think that in itself shows that David to be of a higher
100%, no question
character.
about it. It also, we noted that when we studied it, that there was language that suggested that, yes, while the rabbis call it honest, which is coercion, it was coercion from the sense of how could anybody refuse a request from the king? It was not coercion to this extent that she was saying no, and it was violent. I think that's really the key, and you're 100% right on that. It also makes us much more sympathetic of Tamar, much more so than we were necessarily of Bathsheba. So it's almost as if Amnon is to one extreme, Tamar is to the other extreme. The David and Bathsheba falls somewhere in the middle. You can see the contrast definitely going on over here. Yes. A hey in the middle. Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. We've seen that happen. Which pasuk did it say? Yehonadav. Gimal, it said what? Yonadav. And then where did it go to Yehonadav in 5? Yeah. I have to take a look and see. Obviously, every letter means something. It's a little bit different in Navi than it is in Torah. Torah is like a divine book from God. The Navi is still written by man, but these things do matter. I didn't investigate because, to be honest with you, I didn't even really pay so much attention. We saw this when we were talking a lot about Yonatan and Yehonatan and stuff like that. I have to do a little bit of research and see if there's any significance there. Was Yonadav like an accomplice, so to speak, to this because he gave him the plan? Yonadav is definitely does not go out scot-free. I think we tried in our explanation to explain. I don't think Yonadav intended for this to be the ending. Had he known that would be the ending, I think he would not have offered that explanation. Maybe that's the extra hey that's added there to show you that like he still had somewhat good intent. I don't think he was planning ad kedekach. You don't agree? That's fine. That's fine. You think he's aiding and abetting.
You're saying do this, and she's going to be with you.
Right.
You'll be in the same room. So what did you think was going to happen?
So I think
cards,
I think he was trying to make a date, right? He was trying to make a date between the two of them. He was trying to coach. You ever see the movie Hitch? Right? That's what Yonadav was trying to do. He was trying to play matchmaker over here a little bit because Amnon's shy. They have a little bit of a family relationship. How's he going to make it happen, right? Well, he says he doesn't think anything's going to happen. Well, yeah. I don't know. I hear what you're saying. How to measure Yonadav's culpability is an interesting question. You can argue one way. You could also say he's a little bit more involved. Let's see. Yonadav is going to come up again in the chapter, and maybe that changes your mind a little bit. Cunning. How did Rabbi Sachs translate the shrewd? Okay, so similarly, yeah. I think they're all, but see, here's the thing. I think they're all doing that because of the end. They're all answering it that way because of the end. Sometimes, Hacham, wise. It's a wise person. It's someone smart. But the way he crafts the plot, it sounds a little bit manipulative, shrewd because of what happens in the end. Isn't it fascinating? Rabbi Luke spoke about this yesterday, how the Hebrew word, when you see the word Hebrew word in Hacham, if you just read the English over here, you'd say that's the only explanation. But Hacham,
Usually means good things.
depends on the context a little bit, right? I definitely think the translations here are prisoners of context. Yeah, yeah. Huh? Who else is called Hacham? By the way, I think Rabbi Amnon points out nobody else is ever referred to as Ish Hacham Me'od, right? That's a phrase he says is never used anywhere else in the Tanakh. Ish Hacham Me'od, right? Maybe the Me'od. Your guess is as good as mine. There's a lot that you could potentially try to draw out here.
This one is but when it's
Always. The spelling is usually the same. Yeah.
My name's Tamar.
Yeah.
The story of Yehuda and Tamar. Oh, absolutely, no question. Yeah, it's hard to ignore that shadiness as well, right? And there's no question about it. I think we'll see that the elements of the story don't necessarily point so much with that one, but it definitely helps you to contextualize it a little bit more. Let's see what happens, and then we'll try to come back and talk a little bit about the comparisons to those stories. What pasuk were we on? We're up to pasuk chaf. Very good. Vayomer eleha Avshalom achiha. Now, after this happens, she's making it very public. So Avshalom comes onto the scene. Avshalom says to her, and Avshalom is called Achiha, her brother. Ha-aminon achicha haya imach? Was Amnon your brother with you? I'm not exactly sure why he's phrased ha-aminon. I think it's a grammatical thing because he uses the hey ha-she'elah, the hey of a question. Sometimes when you see the letter hey before a person's name or before a phrase, it's a question. So I think it changes the nikud, but the meaning is the same. I think it changed. It's a good question. I don't know.
Maybe it's a derogatory. Maybe he's already upset.
Maybe.
Suspecting.
Maybe.
I also don't think it's like his name is very similar to Amnon. Maybe she believed in like.
I didn't think about that.
Shouldn't,
So she was very trusting of him, so to speak, or he exuded trust, but then nah. Who said it was a derogatory way? Who said that? That's what the Radak says. The Radak says ha'aminon derech bizayon. He changed the name to kind of play around with his name in a negative way. Maybe because of what Sarah's saying, that Amnon on its own is like Amen, Emunah. So he tries to play around with it like he's the opposite of that. He's not somebody who's so trustworthy and believable, because Avshalom senses there's an issue over here. He says, Ve'ata ahoti hacharishi achichu, al tashiti et libech ladavar hazeh. So Avshalom has a very strange reaction. We'd expect him to be enraged and immediately try to go and seek retribution, but he doesn't. He says, for the present, sister, keep quiet about it. Don't say anything. He is your brother. Almost like, do you think he has a plan? Okay.
Yes, I think he has a plan. Write it down.
He's got a plan.
Don't tell everybody what's going on just yet. Give me a minute to figure this
Right.
out.
But what is his words when he says, but achichahu, because it's your brother? What do you think he meant by that?
Protect
Huh?
your family reputation.
Yeah, it sounds at first like Avshalom is saying to Tamar, you can't publicize this. It's your brother, right? You have to cover up for a little bit here. We have to conceal for him. Now we'll find out that at the end, we'll see Avshalom's intention was not that. Avshalom is now going to play a very clever game. And Avshalom is a very smart individual, shrewd and cunning as well. He doesn't need advisors to tell him what to do. He already knows what to do. He's not like Amnon. And he's already got a plan hatched in his mind of how he's going to do it. But he knows he can't just go right away. He's making this, he's not going to go right away to kill Amnon. He's going to wait and buy out his time. And he's going to, exactly, he's going to play a psychological manipulation game with him. He's going to try to find the right time and place to go ahead and do it. And at first, it sounds like he's telling Tamar, just keep quiet. It's your brother. Don't say anything. You don't want to make such a big stink. Protect the family name, right? Al tashiti et lebech ladavar hazeh. Tamar listens. Vateshev Tamar v'shomema bet Avshalom achiha. Tamar remained in her brother Avshalom's house, quiet. Shomema. She doesn't say anything. Okay. She obviously trusts him. I would have had an issue, trusting him on that language, but okay. Destruction, shomema, desolate. But in this context, it means like quiet, right? V'hamelech David shama et kol ha'devarim ha'eleh vayichar lo me'od. Now the text tells us David's reaction. He heard everything that had happened, and he was greatly upset by it. But that's it. Doesn't tell us that he does anything about it.
2 years go by.
He just sits. He sits as it is. He's definitely upset about it, but doesn't do anything about it. Verse 22, we go back to Avshalom. Avshalom refused to speak good or anything with Amnon. Gives him the silent treatment, good or bad. Avshalom et Amnon. Avshalom has hatred for Amnon. Al devar asher inna et Tamar achoto. Because we know he coerced and violated his sister Tamar. So what's he going to do in the end of the day? Let's read it quickly. 2 years later, Avshalom is having a flock shearing party. He's going to shear his flocks, which is like a big deal. He's going to collect all his wool. He's going to be rich. He wants to invite everybody to come and to celebrate with him. Right? Happens to be this is also in the Yehuda and Tamar story. And it's in the Yosef story as well, where they kill the goat and they do this. So a lot of parallels there as well. Now, Avshalom, Vayikra Avshalom nechol bnei hamelech. Avshalom calls to all of the king's sons to come and join him. And he wants who to be there? He wants Amnon to be there. Vayavo Avshalom el hamelech vayomer hinena gozezim ma'avdecha yelech na hamelech ve'avadav im avdecha. And look what Avshalom's going to do. He tries to cover up. What does he do? He invites the king. He invites David to come. And he says, hey, Dad, King, come. We're all coming. Everyone's servants, everyone's coming. Come to the party. What does Avshalom know? That David's not going to come. He knows David's not going to come. Probably because David is so entrenched in his own issues. He knows David's not going to come. But offering the invitation that he knows he won't accept covers him, right? It looks like he's not hatching anything. He's not plotting anything. Because if he was plotting something, he would never invite his father to be there. He wouldn't do it in front of his father. Verse 25, that language again. He tells him, no, my son, I'm not going. We should not all go. Why should we all go? We're going to burden you with too many people. Avshalom tells him, he urges him. He says, no, please come. Velo ava. That language again, velo ava. He refused. He closes his ears. And David gives him a blessing. Avshalom now is right where he wants to be. Verse 26, Vayomer Avshalom says, okay, so if you're not going to come, Dad, why not send Amnon? He'll represent you. He'll come to us as well. Now, does David know that Amnon and Avshalom are not on speaking terms? He probably does know, which is probably why he's a little bit suspicious, right? Vayomer lo hamelech lama yelech ima. So the king says, why do you want him to come with you? Like, why are you asking for Amnon? Vayifrotz bo Avshalom, but Avshalom is insistent that Amnon come. And here, David doesn't have the power anymore to deflect him, as he did by his own request. Vayishlach ito et Amnon ve'et kol bnei hamelech. And so David sends Amnon together with all of the people to the party. Very good. Very good. The shalach, what's the other shalach that you're talking about? He sent Tamar to Amnon. Great. So David is oddly enough the one who keeps sending everybody to their doom. Great. Excellent. Good. That's exactly what Rabbi Zak brings up. It says it brings you right back to the story of David and Bathsheba. Because what was David doing through the whole story? We emphasized it in chapter 11. Send his messengers, bring me Bathsheba, find out who she is, send him, send that. We said the sending was all the size, was the exposure of David wielding his power improperly. So the irony is, again, midah keneged midah. David sent everybody to do something for himself. Now he's going to end up sending everybody to all of the different problems that are occurring in his own family. Excellent. Beautiful connection that you picked up on there. Vayitzav Avshalom et ne'arav lemor. Avshalom commands his lads, saying, Re'una ketov lev Amnon bayayin ve'amarti alechem haku et Amnon ve'amitem oto al tirao. So finally, Avshalom says, we got Amnon where we want. We're going to be drinking, we're going to be partying, we're going to be celebrating. When you see that Amnon has let down his guard, when he's drunk, when he's calm, that's the time I want you to go and I want you to strike him dead. Do not be afraid to do so. Halo ki anochi tziviti etchem. I'm the one who's commanding you. Chizku, strengthen yourselves, v'hiyu libnei hayil, and be brave men to fulfill this request. In the end of the day, Avshalom is not even going to use his own hand to strike down Amnon. Verse 29, Vaya'asu na'areh Avshalom le'Amnon. The lads carry out Avshalom's command to Amnon, ka'asher tziva Avshalom, as Avshalom commanded them. Vayakumu kol bnei hamelech vayirkedu ish al pirdo vayanusu. When this happens, all of the other sons of the king are frightened, and they get up on their donkeys, they mount their mules, and they run away, and they flee. So Amnon is killed, the party ends, everybody runs away because they don't know what's going on next. Maybe they're the next target. Maybe Avshalom's planning a coup. Maybe he's trying to get rid of all the other children so that he could take over, which is what he's going to end up trying to do in a couple of chapters from now. So there's a lot going on here. They flee. Now David gets bad news back to him, but the wrong news. Verse 30. Vayihema baderech. Excuse me, did I just miss a pasuk? No. Vayihema baderech v'hashemua ba'a. As they're still on the road, a message comes back to David, El David Demon, Hika Avshalom et kol bnei hamelech. They tell him Avshalom killed all of the sons of the king. Velo notar mehem ehad. Not one of them was left over. Vayakom hamelech vayikra et begadav. The king gets up and he tears his garments. Vayishkav arza, and he falls on the floor. Vechol avadav nitzavim kiru'e begadim. And all of his servants are standing around him, all tearing their clothes. And Yonadav comes back on the scene. Vaya'an Yonadav ben Shim'a achi David. Yonadav, the son of Shim'a, brother of David. Vayom, and he says to him, Al yomar adoni et kol ha'ne'arim bnei hamelech emitu. You shouldn't say that. You got the wrong news. They didn't all die. Ki Amnon levado met. Only Amnon died. Ki al pi Avshalom hayta suma. It was by Avshalom's word, his decision, that this took place. Miyom anoto et Tamar achoto. From the day that Amnon had violated Avshalom's sister. So Yonadav is able to give David the right information. Why? Because Yonadav saw this coming. He saw this coming from the beginning. Once he found out that Amnon violated Tamar, and he knew that it was on him, he knew it's not going to end here. Something else is going to happen. Ish hacham me'od. So when he finds this whole happening, Yonadav, even if he wasn't there, he right away tells David, it's not everybody. I know what's going on. Avshalom killed Amnon, and that's the retribution that he got for what happened to his sister. So my lord the king must not think for a moment that all of the princes are dead. Only Amnon is dead. And that's still a tragedy in the eyes of David, and he will mourn for that loss as well. But there's a little bit of a curve here. Listen very carefully to the last few pasukim of our chapter. We have about 5-6 left, and then I'll try to connect the dots a little bit quickly. I know we started a little bit late, so if you indulge me for another about 5-7 minutes, we should be able to finish. By Vrach Avshalom. Avshalom now knows that the target is on his back because he just killed one of his brothers, one of the potential heirs to the throne, and Avshalom flees. Avshalom flees. The watchman on duty looked up and saw a large crowd coming from the road to his rear, from the side of the hill, and he knows that who's coming? All of the princes are coming. Yonadav tells the king, you see, I was right. The princes have come. It's just as your servant said. Just as they finish speaking, the princes come back, and they all break into crying and sadness. The king and all his servants cry, bechi gadol me'od, a cry of great, a very bitter, a great cry. Avshalom barach, Avshalom once again runs away. Vayelech el Tamai ben Amihud melech Geshur vayit'abel al beno kol hayamim. Avshalom runs away, and then it tells us David mourned for his son all the days of his life. Very similar to Yaakov and the Yosef story. But the question here, before we get to that, very good, right?
Mrs. Avshalom knows Avshalom did the right thing.
Now, the simple Veit Abel, when you talk about mourning, our simple, our immediate instinct is to say who? Amnon, because he was killed, right? He died. Mourning is associated with death. But who was the subject? Who was the subject of the sentence in the beginning?
And Avshalom did what he couldn't do and didn't do.
Right.
And there's got to be a sense of pride and guilt.
On whose part? On David's part. For not what? For not...
not taking care of this. This is my fault. I didn't punish him. I was mad, and that's the end of the sentence. And the reason I couldn't act was because of my own fault. fault
Right.
with Bathsheba. So here is my son who stood up and did the right thing, but I can't acknowledge that he did the right thing.
Because he
And
killed
now
another
He
person.
killed my son, and now he's kind of banished for the rest of his life.
See-
And so
see-
I would mourn.
So you see the tearing. You see the tearing that's going on.
And that in itself is a mourning.
Exactly, right? So it's probably that the text left it open-ended to suggest that David is mourning the whole situation, both the son who died, but part of him says he did something terrible and egregious and probably deserved retribution, and also for the son who enacted it because he now has to flee, cannot be next to him. David seems to have an affinity for Avshalom, which we'll see comes about even though Avshalom will rebel against him. Even as Avshalom is rebelling against him, David, it's hard for him to think negatively about Avshalom. He doesn't want anybody to kill Avshalom, even though Avshalom deserves to die. We're going to see that relationship get even more and more complicated. But you can see David is a mess. David is a wreck. He doesn't know where he's coming, where he's going, and his household is in an uproar, is in chaos, as was predicted by God, right? And so David, there's no question, is connecting the dots and understanding that this was meant to happen because of his own actions. Final two pesukim, Avshalom barach vayelech Geshur, vayisham shalosh shanim. Avshalom flees to Geshur, remains there for 3 years. Vatechal David hamelech latzet el Avshalom. King David was pining away for Avshalom. There it says it explicitly. Ki niham al Amnon ki met. For the king had gotten over Amnon's death. So in the end of the day, he gets over Amnon, and now he feels bad about the fact that he doesn't have Avshalom anywhere near him. So David's house is really in an uproar. There's a lot of chaos going on. He's having a hard time keeping a handle on it, but we know this is divinely orchestrated. Now, it doesn't mean that the individuals who are playing the parts of the story are not acting with free will and doing terrible things on their own. And was Avshalom justified in killing Amnon in that way? Should he have found another way for forgiveness? These are difficult questions for us to certainly assess, but definitely the house of David is in a state of disrepair. I just want to take a few moments to briefly address some of the stories that we connected to this chapter. I want to start with the Shechem Dinah story because there's probably the most connections between our chapter and the Shechem Dinah story to this going on over here. So you have language like Vayishkavota, lying together, Vayaneha, coercion together. We have Nevala is used in both stories. Lo ya'asechem b'Yisrael, this is not done. We have people getting angry. We have brothers seeking vengeance, right? We have death and murder at the end of both stories, both times by the brothers. What do you mean? How's it flip? Meaning what? Oh, okay, good. That's going to be the big difference. It's going to be the big difference. I'll get to that in just a minute. We also have the father being quiet in both situations. In Shechem and Dinah, Yaakov doesn't act. He's passive. He's quiet. David in the situation, quiet, passive. It's the brother who goes ahead and acts. So the stories are almost identical to each other with one very important difference. What's the difference? The difference is Shechem takes a liking to Dinah. He then violates Dinah. And what is the aftermath? What happens afterwards? He wants to marry her. Shechem, of all people, realizes he has a growing love for her. His love grows after he violates Dinah, wants to marry and take care of Dinah. Amnon is the opposite. Amnon grows into hatred for Tamar, despises her, treats her poorly, sends her out, wants nothing to do with her. And that is a major highlighted difference. It calls Amnon to the carpet and saying, look how decrepit of an individual Amnon over here is. And in here lies, I think, a very powerful lesson, and then I'll get to Julie. Here lies a very powerful lesson of the nature of sin, right? The nature of desire. When a person feeds their desire, which is where it comes from. In the case of Shechem, it doesn't ever say that he desired her, right? He took a liking to her, he ends up violating her, he does the wrong thing, but then he wants to marry her, he loves her. In the case of Amnon, Amnon has a yetzer hara. He has a desire, and he wants to fulfill this desire. He doesn't care about the individual. What happens when a person fulfills that desire? It's done. It's finished. On to the next thing. On to the next fulfillment. One can never fully satiate and satisfy his craving for something. And more than that, even deeper psychologically, when Amnon hates Tamar, who does he really hate? He hates himself. He hates himself. Exactly what Tamar told him was going to happen. The khirpa, the embarrassment to you, is what's going to happen. What Amnon really hates is he hates himself for the sin that he committed. He looks himself in the mirror and says, what a terrible individual. But he's not going to want to say that about himself. So what does he do? He deflects. He deflects the hatred onto her, says, get out, I never want to see you again. He doesn't want to stare his horrific act at him in the face all the time. And that takes us back to David. David has Bathsheba in front of him and is looking at her and his whole life. Amnon refuses. David is at least facing up to it. Amnon won't do that. Amnon is really having self-loathing and putting it on Tamar and causes him to act even worse, which teaches us a very powerful lesson about our own lives. Sometimes when we sin or we do something wrong, our Yetzer Hara compounds the problem by getting us to feel intense feelings of guilt and self-loathing, which takes us down a very bad spiral, a very dark place. Once a person has done one thing wrong that they've never imagined they would ever do, right? Someone stole money from somebody, and now you're sitting there at night in your bed, and you're like, what kind of a person am I? How could I have done such a thing? A person's desire got the better of them. They stole something from somebody. Terrible act. Now they turn around. What does their Yetzer Hara say? Now, what they should say is, let me return the money. Let me fess up to it. Let me ask for tshuva. Let me own up to my mistake. But the Yetzer Hara tells them, no, what a terrible person you are. You don't deserve to stand in front of God. You don't deserve to get teshuvah. You don't deserve to fix your mistake. You're a terrible human being. And we go into this depression and this self-loathing that causes us to go even further and further in that dark path and do worse and worse things that only compound the problem more and more, one on top of the other. And particularly in the realm of intimacy, when a person makes a mistake in that particular realm, it's perhaps the worst of all of them. That's where a person starts to really feel feelings of depression and self-loathing, and that's what Amnon goes through. David is able to conquer that, and that's why he's able to rise above it. Amnon is not able to, and that's a powerful lesson that I think we could definitely take away from the negative that happens to Amnon that we could try to resist, hopefully in our own life. Lastly, the Yosef story definitely portrays how great an act Yosef did to overcome his desire. He too is forced with the same thing, from the opposite force, but he definitely has a desire for Eshet Potifar. She's a beautiful woman. She's wanting to sleep with him. She's throwing herself at him, and he constantly has to, day in and day out, overcome that pressure, overcome that temptation, to the extent that he's even willing to sabotage himself not to do it. He knows exactly what's going to happen when she pulls the clothing off him and he runs outside, and he knows he's going to get caught and potentially killed, but he doesn't care. He's willing to sacrifice himself for that. And so definitely the stories therefore line up as well when it comes to Yosef and the greatness of Yosef to be able to overcome, right? To overcome that difficulty that he had. I think he brings over here Rav Bazak, he says, Dome, it appears to me, Shenigud ze amad gam lifnei Hazal. The rabbis noticed this connection. ומוצא אני מר ממוות את האישה אשר היא מצודים וחרמים ליבה אסורים ידיה טוב לפני האלוהים ימלט ממנה וחוטא ילכד בה. There's a pasuk in Kohelet, you're not going to like this pasuk, I'm sorry, but the pasuk says, I find that the woman is more bitter than death, אשר היא מצודים, because she traps, וחרמים ליבה אסורים ידיה טוב לפני האלוהים ימלט ממנה. A person should run from her. וחוטא ילכד בה. דרשו חז"ל, what do the rabbis say? Tov lifnei ha'elohim yimalet mimena. Run away from before God. Who's that? That's Yosef. Yosef ran away. Davar acher, another explanation. Tov, who's the Tov? Ze palti vechote ze Amnon. Kohelet juxtaposes Yosef versus Amnon, as Yosef is the ultimate triumphant personality over his desires, while Amnon is the ultimate succumber and the worst type of person when it comes to overcoming his desires. So this is a very painful story. It's an unfortunate story. It comes off of the heels of more difficulty in the house of David. David's house is in turmoil, how he's going to repair it. Unfortunately, David seems to be at this stage of his life a passive member of his life. What's going on? He's almost accepted whatever God is willing to throw at him as a punishment without doing much. He's quiet, he's upset, he doesn't like what's going on, but he's not taking enough of an initiative, and that's going to continue the downward spiral in what's going on in David's life and in his house as more and more strife and more turmoil come up in the next chapters. But we could definitely learn a lot from this very painful, very difficult story about how not to behave and how to overcome certain of the issues, the challenges that the characters in the story were unable to overcome. Julie had something to say before. Self-loathing? Okay, very good. Questions, comments? Okay, very good. Thank you, everybody. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen. Amen.